recording? Yes, good. All right, cats and kittens. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for being the brave individuals who, brave the streets, even though transit thingy is happening. Actually, I just realized I could probably zoom that thing in a little bit more. Like, zooming it in on the projector is probably useful. Okay. Everybody who's watching online was like, thank you. There we go. All right.
Sir, don't forget to edit in your piece to cameras.
Oh.
Like in Mythbusters.
The more editing I do, I find like my general life satisfaction is inversely correlated to the amount of video editing I have to do. So, like, I look at this all back and I have a script to do everything for me, which means it never, like, in my perfect world, my videos are never touched by human hands, just like Willy Wonka's chocolate. So, today, first we should do some general housekeeping type stuff. Number one, the Hamilton Street and Railway Company has gone on strike, which should not be, if you're hearing this from this lecture, then you need to read your emails a bit more frequently. Basically, bus service in the city is no longer operable for a period of unknown time. The direction which has come from the college is that classes, tests, exams, etc. are to maintain as scheduled. And, I understand that many people will interpret things in many different ways. As scheduled also means you are scheduled not only for a time but for a place, right? So I am not moving this section online, as you can tell by the fact that it's happening. So I'm not moving this class online, nor am I with any of my other sections, as we are scheduled to be an in-person class here teaching at this point in time during the week. So that will continue. That being said, for the purposes of accommodating people who may have difficulty getting in given the transit strike, I understand that not everybody lives around Mohawk College. Some people are commuting in from as far as, Mississauga, I think. So, basically, my new thing is I'm going to record all of the classes that I do, not just like the one section of this class per week. So, if previously you were not, basically it's so that you can keep pace with the classes like it's your own class, which it is. Yes?
When you post the videos, are you going to be saying which section the video is for?
Yeah, I'll post which section the video is for. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll put it in the title of the video. Yeah. Maybe I might even make different playlists for them. But I have feeling extra fancy. Yeah. So, yes, good. Any questions? I had a word with Professor Adams about the subject of the final exam. I'm hoping that this transit strike does not extend very far, and hopefully not into the exam period. I can't imagine it lasting more than a week or two. So one would hope, anyway. But if that were to happen, that it would last that long, there will be no changes to the final exam. The final exam will not become an online exam. It will still be a pencil and paper paper test just like the midterm, and it will still be, you will have to come to this institution physically to write the test. Just because the HSR is down, that does not mean that all transportation has ended, period. You are expected to make accommodation to be here for the exam, although I am accommodating you for the slightly more regular lectures. Make sense? Good. All right. With that out of the way, sorry that we missed our class 2 days ago. I was sick, and that makes us very, slightly behind. But we're actually not too far behind. Get out of here. Oh, and by the way, tomorrow is Remembrance Day, so if you're not aware of what Remembrance Day is, I highly recommend you go and visit the cenotaph tomorrow at 11 a.m.
The what?
Cenotaph. It's the war memorial.
Oh, that's the word?
Cenotaph is the word for it. A monument to someone buried elsewhere, particularly commemorating people who died in war. So when you have someone who's commemorated at the spot they're buried, that's a gravestone. When you have a rock that's commemorating someone who is buried elsewhere, that's a cenotaph. So these monuments are, generally speaking, to commemorate people who died in the world wars, particularly the First World War. We didn't quite have, well, this will also be in the Second World War. Basically, there was no infrastructure available to be able to return the bodies of people who died in the war home. Particularly in the First World War, we didn't really have transatlantic flight, for example, which is what's used today. So the people who died in the war ended up buried in France, most of them, because that's where the war was taking place primarily. So that's what we have. We have cenotaphs here because we're not France, basically.
Sir,
Yes.
the cenotaph in Hamilton is in Gore Park.
Gore Park. Yes. Thank you. Gore Park is right in the middle of Hamilton. I'm sure you've all been here, or seen it on a map at least. You've got that big fountain. You've got the statue of Queen Victoria with the lion. And they sometimes have like a Christmas carnival there. This looks like that would be, yeah, that's the cenotaph, yeah. So, yep. Very solemn occasion commemorating the war dead. Incidentally, do you know why it's held November 11th at 11 in the morning?
Is that when the war ended?
Yes, that was the time of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, and also the time of armistice, which is the end of the First World War.
You like history?
I do like history, yeah.
I
Technically,
can tell.
sir,
Yes?
technically, an armistice is not the end of a war. It is the end of the fighting of the war.
Yes. Okay. The
I'm
end of
sorry to be
end of the
pedantic.
fighting of the war.
I'm sorry
Right.
to be pedantic, but that is my stick.
Well, back in those days, you would have like, it would take time to inform people that the war was over, right?
Yeah.
You can have two countries no longer be in an official state of war, and yet the two armies are still fighting each other because like messages are being sent around on carrier pigeons and stuff, right? You know? Anyway. Yeah, I actually had a grandfather in the First World War, which is kind of unusual for a person of my age.
Yeah.
You know? He was born in 1894. My grandfather on my mother's side.
So he was 20 years old?
Well, yeah, he was actually a sergeant. He was a sergeant in the there's a small military base there was in Niagara Falls. It was a prisoner of war facility actually where they kept German spies. And yeah, that's what he was. He was the sergeant who was, or a sergeant who was in charge of a military prison. So although he served during the First World War, he never was actually sent to Europe, and he never like saw action, so to speak, which is probably why he's still alive, or he was after. He's not still alive. That would be incredible.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. But no, he died, of course, in like the 1960s. But yeah, no, he did survive the war probably because he wasn't actually in Europe. That was an extremely bloody war.
Is your father 73?
It's on my mother's side.
Oh, is your
Yeah.
mom like 73?
My mother was a child of her father's old age.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense, because men can have
Yeah,
children.
yeah, and she had me when she was in her mid-30s. So on that side of the family, the generations are just super far apart. But we should actually study some bloody
Yeah,
programming.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. So, shut up, phone. Nobody likes you. So, we did a brief introduction to object-oriented programming in PHP earlier in the course. We are revisiting it now because the methods that we are going to use to do databases in PHP use object-oriented constructs. Most particularly, we're going to use the PDO or PHP data object in order to interact with the database, interact with MySQL databases through XAMPP and through CS Unix. So we're going to need a certain amount of object orientation. Now, we're not going to worry about some of our more advanced object-oriented functions from our Java classes. We're not going to worry so much about inheritance, or we're not going to worry about, UML diagrams and building a lot of stuff up from scratch. We just need to be conversant in them enough to be able to use them effectively. Sound good? Okay. So, if you're familiar at all with how Python handles object-oriented programming, then this will seem extremely familiar. The converse of that is if you've never done object-oriented in Python, this is very similar to how it works in Python as well. So you're almost learning two languages at once. To declare a class, we declare class A. To add methods to a class, we call a function, or we create a function, we give it some contents in the normal way. It's not called method, it's called function. PHP seems to slide somewhat closer to the C++ conventions for naming things and also for some of the operators. So in PHP, we are inclined to call this a member function rather than a method. This is C++ terminology. Member function. Sound good? Otherwise, it is a method. It's two names to apply to the same concept. So, to create a new instance of a class, or to create an object from a class, we create we use a Java-style invocation. Once again, our reference variable, none of our variables in PHP have any data type specified, so it's just a variable, but you assign it the Java-style new object creation syntax. Make sense? This is somewhat different to Python. In Python, you drop the new. Make sense? Constructors are a little bit different. If you, who can remind me what a constructor looks like in Java? How do you know that a method is a constructor?
It's either private or public, and then it's just the name of the class.
It's just the name of the class. What is it missing? Nope, it can have parameters.
It doesn't say void or string or like return type.
There's no return.
Precisely. It's missing its return type because the return type is a reference to the newly created object, always from a constructor, right? So, in the case of PHP, and again, Python does this very similarly, you have a dedicated keyword that you use as your method name that tells it that it's the constructor. It's construct, yeah. In Python, it's underscore underscore init, or initialize. Please note, very important, that's 2 underscore characters, right? 1, 2 underscore characters. That one's kind of easy to miss. Note that, in addition to a constructor, we also have the ability to give a destructor. I will eat my shirt if Java doesn't also have this ability.
Sir, don't make promises.
This is, didn't I tell you this is made out of spun candy floss?
Right.
So,
It's terrible when it gets wet.
so we have a destructor, which, you can use it to destroy the object rather than just, One might ask the question, if this thing is allocating memory, this object, how do we deallocate that memory when the object is destroyed, right? This is kind of a problem that Java likes to ignore and sort of lean on the garbage collector for. But if you don't trust the garbage collector, which, it's nice to have one, but ideally you would program in such a way that you don't need a garbage collector, If you're the type of meticulous sort of person that always wants to make sure they clean up all of their own memory, that's where you would, inside of a destructor is where you would put all of the statements releasing any resources that your object has allocated. Another example of what you might do with a constructor-destructor combo, let's say that just, for whatever reason, you wanted to encapsulate all of the functions you wanted to, all of the code you wanted to run on a particular file. Like you want the constructor to open the file, the object itself to operate, perform certain operations on the file, and then when you want to destroy the object, you also want to close the file, right? That's where you would put that. You would put the part where you close the file into the destructor. Although, once again, file handles, when they're collected up by the garbage collector, will close the files they're associated with. If you were thinking, oh man, all that file I/O stuff we were doing, it looks so imperative. I have been being bitten by the object-oriented bug. I want everything to be in classes now. That's what you would use a destructor for in that context. Make sense? So, the biggest difference for all of you on a sort of physical syntax level, whereas in most languages we use dot syntax to access the attributes and methods or member variables and member functions of an object or class. In PHP, what does the dot operator do? It concatenates, and PHP doesn't like to share its operators. It hates polymorphism in that way. So,
Even though it's a different language.
well, even though polymorphism is an extremely powerful and flexible tool, yes, PHP was written by, I don't know, people who are kind of subtle, curmudgeonly, kind of hate humans type people, I guess.
I bet you it was like a college thing.
Instead, we use arrow syntax. So, when we access either the fields or the methods of an object, we use hyphen greater than, which is single bar arrow. Question?
Does C# also use arrow keys like for attributes?
No. C# uses dot syntax as well.
I know when you call them, but like, actually, I get what you're saying.
Here's my follow-up question to that. Like you guys have been taking C#, right?
Yeah.
Does it support pointers? Yes.
I would go to try.
Insofar as you've been messing with pointers, that's what that typically means. So let me give you just a very brief lesson in history and ancient languages. Origin of the single arrow operator. All right? It's not like it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from C. So in C, you can have variables, and you can have pointers. Pointers are normally indicated with stars. A pointer is the memory address of another variable. So this is at 88FF. A pointer to that memory cell holds the memory address of that variable, right? Holds the memory address here. So, in C, there are no classes, but there is a thing called a struct. Structs are collections of variables. So, you can have, an int, and a char star, or a char star. That's another thing C doesn't have is a native data type for strings. It uses character arrays or pointers to characters to indicate strings. So, if this is a struct, then a pointer, this is struct A, then a pointer to a struct would be a star, right? If you have a reference, if you have a variable of type A, right? You say, let's call this A, B, and C, right? You would say x dot A, x dot B, x dot C. If what you have is a pointer to, a pointer to a structure, then you have y arrow A, y arrow B, y arrow C. So the arrow is combination field access and dereferencing operator. So that's where the arrow comes from. It's field access plus dereferencing operator. I'm pretty sure that the PHP $ is a dereferencing operator. For some reason, like PHP thinks it needs to be explicitly stated that every time you access the value inside of a variable, you have to dereference the variable. Technically true, right? But most programming languages don't see that as useful information, because when are you ever dealing with a variable without dereferencing it? So it would be interesting to see if, like, in PHP, if you left the $signs out, does it treat it like pointers? But that's perhaps a question for another day. So that's where the arrow comes from. It's dereferencing combined with field access in C. Another point that might be a bit another point that might be a little bit esoteric. In PHP, if I have, let's say I have an object Q and I wish to access field P, right? It's Q arrow P, but you do not repeat the $sign. The $sign only occurs once at the beginning. I'd ask if it makes sense, but since we're talking about $signs in PHP, nothing really makes sense. So, good. In PHP objects, the extends keyword also sets up inheritance the same way that it does in Java. And we use the super keyword in Java becomes the parent keyword in PHP. So rather than talking about superclasses and subclasses, we talk about parent and child classes. It's exactly the same gosh darn concept, they just renamed it something else. Make sense? So one thing that you may note right here, calling the parent's constructor. Does anybody see a symbol that we've never seen before in that line? Yes. Does anybody want to take a guess what the : is?
Is it like the base?
Yeah, this is the basic class. This is the derived class.
Oh, it's like the equivalent of this, right?
Not quite, because we also have this. This is a reference to the object the object specified here. Yes.
So like the super keyword?
It's required to use the super keyword. Yes.
It's like inheritance or abstract.
It's related to the concept. Yes.
Damn it.
So like when you're, for example, you have like specific class, Java, if you put the class name and then a period and then a method, would let you then call that method with whatever parameters that would be specifically typed, and then object of that class.
Not really. Any C++ programmers in the crowd?
Years ago, sir.
Years
Touched
ago?
on since.
Not in
It's
a
been
long time. Yeah, it's been a while.
Scope resolution operator.
Oh, is
That's
that
the scope resolution operator.
The STD in, STD out. That's
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So, again, PHP can't decide where he is, where he's coming from. Just influences pulled from Java, pulled from JavaScript, pulled from Python, pulled from C++, pulled from everywhere. It's the C++ scope resolution operator. This guy right here. Yep.
It's short.
However, there we go. Here's the PHP documentation on it. The scope resolution operator, also called Payim Neku.Yayim, or in simpler terms, the double colon, is a token that allows access to static, constant, and overridden properties or methods of a class. Note, this complicated word that I had difficulty pronouncing would at first seem like a strange choice for naming double colon. However, while writing the ZN Engine 0.5, which powers PHP 3, that's what the Zend team decided to call it. It actually means double colon in Hebrew. So the that's its name in PHP in theory, because it was written by people who speak Hebrew, I guess. So there you go. So that's PHP for you. Funny little language. Any questions about any of that? Do you guys kind of get the idea? Do you require me to show you an example of working with a class in PHP?
Examples are always nice.
Okay.
Example would be good. It's helpful. It's always good to have some stuff.
True. All right. When you start up your XAMPP server today, please start both Apache and MySQL. Oh. Fancy schmancy. It seem like such a big deal when Firefox wants to make an update. It's like, black out your whole screen.
Yeah, more like it's just gonna pop a tiny little window and ask for your password.
Yeah. They want to make sure that you're treating administrative privileges with the due respect that they deserve.
Half the time it doesn't even ask me for my admin password. They will launch something that definitely needs admin. Admin requiring programs have little admin symbols, right? With
Yeah.
the shield.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't ask me for it, it just launches it anyway. It's like, what was the point of putting egg on there if it's not necessary?
Well, you've got several different classes of privileges, right? Oh, Visual Studio, no. Oh, man. Get out of here, Visual Studio. Nobody likes you. Except for Brian. Brian likes you.
I like Brian.
Brian is a cool guy.
But not Visual Studio.
And I'm sure he has his reasons for liking Visual Studio. Personally, I find like the advanced autocomplete both like creepy and annoying at the same time. Alright. New file. Let's call it objects.php. Boom. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. There we go. There we go. So, what shall we make an object out of? What's like a classic example? Shape, animal, yeah. What?
Band?
Band?
Cars.
Cars? Yeah, okay. This is actually appropriate because this weekend I think my wife and I are going shopping for a minivan. So, yep. Oh yeah. It was inevitable, you know. 2 kids and another one on the way, you know.
Congratulations.
It's time for a minivan.
Yeah, congratulations, that's really exciting.
Pretty sure
It's too soon. Yeah, we'll see. Class. Car. Or perhaps, yeah, car is fine. Don't overthink it. So, constructor. Well, first we decide what our instance variables should be. Public, number of wheels, wheel count, sure. Public, color, yeah. Private, glove, compartment, contents.
It's a mouthful, sir.
Hmm?
It's a mouthful.
I know, but you know, we do tell you folks to use expressive variable names, don't we?
Yes.
So, function, construct, ooh, this might be useful. So, if you take a look in here, you know, you've got some kind of cool things in there as well as the usual stuff. PHP doesn't let you do this because it likes all of its operators to only do one thing. But a thing you can do in Python is you can overload all of your like standard arithmetic symbols very easily in Python. Like in order to overload the addition operator, all you have to do is provide a definition for add, taking 2 arguments, and then you can use plus signs on all of your custom classes, which is kind of cool. You can do this in other languages as well, but Python makes it relatively simple to do that. But in PHP, it's a little bit like overriding toString in Java. But anyway, construct. Let's take, you know, wheels, color. Oh my goodness. A pox upon American imperialism and
I
text
saw that you did that, but I wasn't gonna point it out.
Yeah. Bloody Americans. All right.
It's like I just looked you up, I don't care enough.
I mean,
There, so.
I'm a Canadian, and therefore it is correct for me to speak the King's English. So I used to say the King's English.
I know.
So sad. She was a nice lady.
Did you ever meet her?
No. So this wheel count is equal to wheels. Technically, I don't have to do this because except with color because they're not they don't have conflicting names. But you know, I thought I'd give you a very Java-esque introduction. Oh, there we go.
Server, that's not the variable name.
Yeah, fine. I'll abbreviate it. GCC. Better? Also the best compiler. Function open love compartment. Return this GCC. There we go. Etc. Then, if we wish to run things, call it old car is a new car. Har. Now wheel count is 4. Color was blue. Glove compartment contents, lots of things. New car equals new car. Wheels for color maybe red. There's a red one like in a dealership not too far from us. Maybe we'll see. It's a decent price, you know. Contents, hopefully no severed hands. So there you go. Echo. Old car was old car arrow color. New car will be new car arrow color. There we go. This is really the point in PHP where you really want to start like just reflexively using the curly brace notation when you're inserting things into strings. Question?
So like in Java, when you're making new classes and everything, the point of it is like encapsulation and like everything. But like for this, what's like you're making the classes inside the PHP thing, so like it's not really like focusing on encapsulation. So like I'm wondering if the point is just to make it more clear, so like when the person's reading it, like, it makes code readability easier in that sense.
So keep in mind that okay. So in a PHP context, right? Remember that from the perspective of client-server interactions, our PHP scripts should be server operations, right?
Yeah.
So in that context, yes, this is a programming example. This isn't like something that you would necessarily, like you probably wouldn't deploy something like this to a server to solve an actual problem, right? But the PHP, the individual PHP script that the form or the AJAX or the URL is requesting, that thing can import or require other PHP scripts. A A definition like this would most likely be stored inside of a, we used to call them library files, right? You would keep this in a library, right? And then
Oh, yeah.
not only does it sort of, it just provides the definition without having to, physically be in the file. That allows it to be shared among many different files that use the same sorts of data. Furthermore, remember that JSON is JavaScript object notation, right? We can take objects and encode the data contained within them the same way that we do an associative array. Basically, all that an associative array is it's an object with all of the methods stripped out, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also, the library part makes sense. I saw like an example online of like encryption, decryption using like, they basically made it a class, but they referred to it as a library. So I was like, it makes sense. That
Yeah.
you just explained it.
Yeah. So yeah. So that's where you would use this. Like normally, you will rely on objects that other people write, such as we are going to when we do the databasing stuff.
Yeah.
But let me run this thing, and then we'll see that it works. And if anybody wants any interesting extensions on it, we'll do that. And then maybe we'll move on to databases. There we go. So you can see our basic object stuff works fine. We get the data out of our object, insert it into our echo statement. Everything works fine. Does anybody want to see anything demonstrated with respect to objects that isn't demonstrated by this example? Yes? Destruct. Okay.
Are we ever really gonna use destruct? Like, how common is it to be used?
Well, since we're not really expecting you to write your own objects in this course, probably you won't be writing any constructs either,
Okay.
right? However, it is like, there's kind of a reason that it's skipped over in Java.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like we never use that in Java or like .NET. So
Yeah.
the applications of it are different, like great.
Basically, the garbage collector is relied upon to be good enough for most purposes most of the time. If you want to get like right down into the nitty-gritty of memory management and like, it's one of those types of, okay, so have you ever been playing like a tycoon game, like Roller Coaster Tycoon? You know that like the more attention, or like Stellaris or any Paradox game, good examples, like the games have like these like automated, you can set the governor to do things, and they have these scripts to run things automatically if you don't want to deal with all of the micromanagement stuff. But everybody knows that the more attention you pay to the micromanagement stuff, the better overall you will perform in the game, right? So like getting good at the micromanagement is like a huge skill cap, and it's the difference between like the casual player and the expert player, right? It's no different here with memory management, right? If you want to just write code that works, you can do that without using destructors. Languages have garbage collection that will take care of it most of the time. There might be the rare case where you need one, right? You should be familiar that the concept exists at least, right? But if you want code that's optimized and runs really, really efficiently, and if the amount of memory your application takes up at all times is of concern to you, then triggering an object to release all of its memory when it is at the moment that it's destroyed, rather than waiting for garbage collection to pick it up, that is always going to be more efficient in terms of memory usage, right? Because the garbage collector, it doesn't, like, certain things can trigger it, but in general, it only runs every so often, right? It's not meant to run all the time, otherwise it would just be like way too much runtime consumed to the garbage collector. Make sense? Yeah. That's actually a question. Let me see here. How often does Java's garbage collection run? Nah. Nobody knows. Somebody asked, oh, here it is, one answer, okay. Depends on memory usage and the heap in which the objects are stored. Uh-oh. It does not depend on time. It depends on the new memory requirements and available memory. Uh-oh. So Java doesn't run it every so often. It runs it when you run out of memory. It tries to find more memory for you. So I guess in theory, if you handled your own memory management well in Java, you would never need the garbage collector, so it would never run and slow you down. In theory, at least. I'm not sure that I would want to take on the task of plugging all of the memory leaks, but by the way, that's fundamentally what is understood by the concept of a memory leak. Have you guys heard the term memory leak?
All the
I've
time.
heard it when associated with Chrome.
Yes. So this is what a memory leak is, right? Let's say you allocate an array. Oh my gosh, I'm having a terrible time with my markers today. So,
You should get like the Crayola markers, like all of them, and just have this giant long stick of Crayola markers.
yeah, but these are the department supplies these, and I'm not sure they're whiteboard markers.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I could just get Felix's. I'm sure they got better grips on them, you know. But anyway, so a memory leak, all right? Important concept in computing if you care about efficiency. So let's say you allocate a data structure, right? So, you know, an array with 1,000 elements. You allocate it, you use it, and then you forget about it, right? So what often happens is that your scope okay. All right, memory management time. Memory management. So, you guys know the difference between stack and heap memory?
I know what a stack is.
First in, first out.
Yes. Related words. Yes, no. So, you have the stack, right? Also known as the system call stack, right? Or the system call stack in capital letters, or reverently, the stack, all right? Then you have heap memory. So the system call stack is relatively, there's not a huge amount of space in it. And whenever you call a function, let's say, you know, we're executing in this stack frame, we call a new function, a new stack frame is created, execution jumps to the new stack frame, let's say it's for function foo. This is where all of foo's local variables are stored inside of the stack frame. So So, you know, if you have x equals 5 and what have you, right? When this function, right? When this function needs larger data allocated, when it's performing, you know, in C terms, an malloc, memory allocation operation. It's not, when it's asking for memory to be allocated to it specifically, it's doing so in heap memory, not in stack memory. So it's taking some amount of heap memory, which is organized, you know, as a heap rather than as a stack, and giving a reference to it to the stack so that it can be operated on, right? Now, in newer programs, when this stack frame finishes executing, when the function finishes executing, everything in the stack frame is deleted, right? That stack frame is freed, that can be used for the next function call, that memory, you know, everything's fine. This, by the way, is why local variables disappear when the function is gone. It's because literally the memory is deallocated on the stack, right? But we also have this little piece of memory hanging out in heap memory, whose only known reference was inside of the stack frame and has now been deallocated. If you have an intelligent programming language that knows to follow up on these things, it will follow through. It will have a somewhat more complicated stack frame closure procedure. It will follow up on this reference, deallocate it, you know, and then follow it back and make sure it deallocates everything that's only exists in the stack. But of course, that adds function overhead, right? You guys know what overhead means, right? Yeah, it's a cost every time you do something, right? Functions have a certain amount of overhead at this level. Just, you know, we try to minimize the amount of function overhead we have because functions are called quite frequently, right? But the question is, what if it doesn't do that? And in a language like C, for example, it just wouldn't do that, right? So the answer is the bond that links that piece of heap memory to anything that currently exists in the program is broken. That memory becomes orphaned because the way that computer memory works, the start address and size of this allocated section is like, it's essentially random and cannot be predicted by the program. The operating system does keep track of it in a big table, of course, because otherwise, you know, you just lose memory all over the place, right? The operating system knows where this is, but the program isn't allowed to know the contents of the operating system's memory allocation table. Obviously, that would be a huge security problem. So basically, any memory that has no reference to it is dead memory, right? It's dead memory, but the operating system has no idea that it's dead memory, right? So what programming languages or programming environments that have garbage collection do is anytime you allocate memory in this manner, it keeps a secondary copy of the pointer in a big table somewhere so that periodically it can go through and check to see how many of the references are still live. And if it encounters dead references, it can deallocate the memory, right? But this idea that you just have memory that becomes allocated that's never deallocated, that is what's known as a memory leak. It's not like the memory is leaking like it is out of a bucket, right? It's more, okay. I prefer a video game reference. You know, as usual. So have you ever played one of these video games? How many people have played Fez?
Oh,
Oh man.
Listen, sir,
Heard of it,
I
sir.
was going to, but then the developer was a bit of an asshole.
It's still a really good game though.
Yeah, I know it is. I just don't want to support
So, you know these games where like you have a level, you know, and like there's just kind of these like void cubes in the level, you know, and like if you touch them you die, like stuff like that. And it's like, it's been a thing in modern video games lately to sort of show like memory corruption as a feature in the game, you know? That's like, it's been a thing in video games lately. People who know what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, it's more like that. It's more like you're trying to play in a level, and the more memory leaks there are, there's just bits missing in the memory, right? Bits that can't be used by anything, right? That's more like what a memory leak is. Imagine a cookie, right, with chocolate chips made of concrete, and the chocolate chips just grow over time. And so that over time there's less and less cookie, right? That's what a memory leak does to your RAM, all right? So that's why people who use Windows operating systems have to restart their computers every once in a while, because the only way to clear all of these little bastards is to reset your memory completely from scratch. So that's what a memory leak is. And the reason that Linux doesn't suffer from these problems is because Linux was written by people who free their damn memory when they're finished with it and follow the correct procedures. Whereas people who, like, basically this is the difference between a good operating system and a bad operating system, you know? It's the difference between something that works and something that works well, right? But anyway, at any rate, I was supposed to do a destructor function, destruct, oh yeah, thank you. So, I've got a destructor that says, I'm melting, oh what a world, which is a reference to the classic film, The Wizard of Oz. It's the final words of the Wicked Witch of the West. So, get out of here. Now I just have to look up how you actually destroy an object with PHP. Probably like kill or something. Unset. Oh, that's kind of anticlimactic. Unset. Old car.
Too old.
Yep.
Script.
Yep. Actually, we're not sending it to this scrap heap. My father-in-law is probably going to buy it. So he's like one of these guys who like is very strongly into Honda Civics. Ah, there you
Why?
go. What?
Why?
Superior engineering.
Terrible design.
I will leave you in a room with him. Leave, and a month later you'll still be having this conversation with him.
Basically, yeah.
So, I'd just like to point out, I get the I'm melting speech twice, right? Because the object destructor is being called during garbage collection at the end of the PHP script when everything's being collected up and destroyed. So I unset things manually, and then things are unset anyways at the end. Here, I can prove it. Echo. Echo. Do it again. There you go. The physical spacing between these two outputs proves that this is being called during unset, and it's being the other one is being destroyed when we destroy, or when the whole PHP script ends. Wow, you two were both simultaneous. You first, then you.
Okay, so if you call unset, it'll run the deconstructor when you call it, or else it'll just run it at the end.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So I'm assuming this is more of managing any functions, methods, and classes while the PHP script still running. So if you needed to deallocate some stuff, you do that as construct, otherwise you
Yeah, it's like, imagine if you like opened a file, right, as part of the constructor. In theory, it's good practice to deallocate that in the deconstructor. Like, in theory, by the end of garbage collection, everything will have been deallocated properly, but this gives you control over when that happens, right? And also keep in mind that if you are like using if you're using file handles inside of objects in that way, keep in mind that files are a shared resource on a folder, right? So you don't want to lock the file down for longer than is necessary, which is, why, so you create the file, you create the object that opens the file. When you're finished with it, you destroy the object that releases the file, then the next person can use it, right? As opposed to waiting for the end of your script, which might take much longer, right? You might have like database accesses to do with a remote database server or something, It's just about cleanliness and hygiene and being polite. All of those things at once. Any other questions? All right. Sounds good. Woo. So, let's talk databases. So, is there anybody in this room who is not in the SQL class right now? Have you done it previously? Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, was your hand up?
Yeah, I also did it previously.
Okay. Is there anybody in this class who is not currently in the SQL class or has not done the SQL class recently? Okay. So, basically, it's like this class is not co-requisite with the SQL class, so in theory, this lecture is supposed to contain a brief introduction to SQL and go through your basic CRUD operations. But since probably most of you can be relied upon to already know your CRUD operations, I can sort of suffice to say we're going to be focusing on in this course on just operations within one table. We're not going to worry about multiple tables, but we do have to do a certain amount of setup to be able to access our databases from PHP. The first, gross. The first is to access our local host on XAMPP, and so that we can do that on both XAMPP and CS Unix, and set up both the database and your table, right? So on CS Unix, a database has already been created for you. The name of this database is the same as your CS Unix login name, right? So SA and then your student number. You will need a password to be able to get into it. That password is also hanging out inside of your CS Unix home directory. Hopefully none of you deleted everything in your home directories. Unlikely, I guess, but you know, hopefully the information can be restored if necessary, but yeah. So, anyway. So yeah, we're going to be using an SQL database, structured query language. Okay, one of these things is not like the other. Which one of these is a non-relational database?
Non-relational?
Non-relational. This actually, this sentence implies that they're all relational databases. That's not actually true. One of those is a non-relational database.
I only know two of them,
All right.
Let me see here.
Sorry? It is Mongo. That's right.
That was a wild guess, that was.
Yeah. MongoDB is a non-relational database. It's actually JSON-based. Rather than basing itself in like structured query rectangular data world, I always somewhat tongue-in-cheek refer to like spreadsheets and SQL databases as rectangular data because you're basically operating mostly in rectangles. MongoDB is JSON-based, so it uses more like, you know, object, attribute, 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 you know, sub-object, 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 sub-object type access. It's reasonably popular for a lot of different stuff. Like if you actually take if you peel back the layers on what most social media is doing behind the hood, a lot of social media posts are encoded in like JSON rather than in SQL style rectangular data again. Not that you can't do that with it, but this is not to say that SQL isn't an extremely relevant technology to the modern web. It absolutely is. Just because an alternative exists does not mean that we are moving towards a world where, you know, 100% of internet databasing will be done with non-relational databases. You know, basically there will be some kind of settling point. You know, maybe non-relational databases will be like, you know, 15% of all databasing applications, and SQL will be the other, you know, 85%. It'll level off at some, you know, market share percentage until some new technology comes along and upsets the apple cart once again, and then everything has to rebalance. So, you know, is it useful to know both relational and non-relational databases? Absolutely. But, you know, the reason that we're teaching SQL basically in the program is the program has a bit of a bias towards, you know, what was true in the past will be true in the future, type conservatism with respect to languages and that sort of thing. You know, part of the reason that we're also still doing PHP, even though there are many, you know, some would argue that we should be doing other more modern server-side languages. Basically, you know, let me put it to you this way, though, right? Like, this is a college, right? Being a college, we are primarily interested in getting you into jobs, right? And even if there are new, hip, and modern languages that are coming along and, completely replacing PHP and doing everything it does 10 times better, right? There will still be a market for PHP programmers, which is of considerable size, for many, many, many years into the future, probably your entire career. And the reason for that is that, never underestimate the power of legacy code. Never underestimate the power of legacy code. PHP was used for quite a while, right? Even if absolutely no websites in 5 years from now, no websites use PHP, no new ones. There will be enough old PHP in older websites to keep, a fair contingent of people employed into the future. And, basically, if you want to learn new stuff, new languages, PHP has presented the basics of server-side programming to you in, a sufficiently digestible way, hopefully, that you can take those principles and apply them to new languages, right? Outside of school, I don't have to teach that to you, basically. I just have to teach you PHP. But anyway, so that's the charitable case for why we're still doing PHP. Yes? I believe it's something like MySQL password.txt, something like that. It might be a hidden file, which means that the file name will be prepended with the dot character.
How do I make this visible on
I don't know, but you can do it pretty easily on Putty. You know what? I'm going to do it on XAMPP, and then I'll do the whole thing on CS Unix, and then you'll have, just be patient with me, please.
It looks like the password is just my birthday.
Oh.
SA_year, month, day, my birthday.
Yeah, that used to also be the default passwords. That should, in theory, be the default password to get into the account in the first place, except everybody had to have it reset anyways, because IT did this thing where they went through and wiped all the account passwords, but anyway. Okay, SQL, nobody is interested. Okay, let's go. All right. So let's talk XAMPP. You may have noticed we have both Apache and MySQL servers, which are possible to be started. Now, the SQL server, once started, services incoming SQL requests. We're talking about a new packet type, right? So, if you have something on your computer, if you're running on your own laptop, right? If you have something on your computer which is already doing a localhost SQL server, that will interfere with XAMPP's ability to start. So if you can't start MySQL, the overwhelming likelihood is that some other program on your computer has already started something that services SQL requests. You want to shut that down and start up XAMPP, right? Particularly because, you probably don't know what the origin of that was anyways. So you can get some information about which version might be running by taking a look inside of the log file. The reason I'm saying all of this is because I had a student in my other class who had this problem. Even after resetting the computer, have you tried turning it off and on again? Even after that, this whatever application was sitting there hogging the SQL socket was still doing it. So the best I could say is like, go through your startup programs and try disabling them until one stops doing that, because that's all the advice I can give you. However, in the log file for that student, it did show up that like it was starting MariaDB, which is another SQL server. So you can get some useful information from the log file to try to debug which other service is currently sitting on that. So yeah. Yeah, basically. But you know, if you're doing it on a lab computer anyway, there's absolutely no reason why any kind of server shouldn't be running. So here we have it. Good. Now we must configure the database. Our goal in configuring the database on XAMPP is to configure it in such a manner that our PHP code, once written, should require minimal modification to then run on CS Unix. Right? So, if you click admin, you will see a PHP myadmin page. Down this sidebar, these are all of the databases that are currently on the server, on this, this XAMPP contained version of the server. We want to create a new one with the same name as it will have on CS Unix. So that is your CS Unix login username. Make sense? Oh, yes. So you click new. Database name, you choose your CS Unix username. In my case, that's Moore. Because I'm a professor, I get special names for things. Don't worry about this. I think it has something to do with character encoding. I'm not sure why we're default set to Swedish, but Swedish seems to work, so let's go with Swedish. Among all the peoples of the world, the Swedish seem to cause relatively few problems, so they seem to keep to themselves most of the time, so there you go. So, I mean, unless you're talking like 1,000 years ago, during the height of the Viking Age, they kind of got it out of their system. So, having created our database, we now create a table. For the purposes of demonstration, over this class and the next one, I'm going to work up a sort of class demonstration level username and password login system. This will help us like contextualize some of the security concerns that we'll be talking about next week with respect to databases. So, I'd like to set up login credentials. I wish to create a table. Let's call it credentials. I'm going to create it with 3 columns. One for username, one for password. Can anybody guess what the third one would be? I mean, you can do that. Yes?
Taking ID, user
An ID number?
Primary key.
Primary key? Yes. Primary key ID number. Although that's also a good idea, but it makes the example a little bit complicated. activated, so like whether or not past the account is activated, that I can see that being a very useful thing. Although, in theory, you could also keep that in like a separate database of like user preferences, but anyway, question?
Nowadays, like when you log in, because you have to use an authenticator,
Mm-hmm.
would that be public or would that be something?
Like a two-factor authentication?
Yeah. There's a lot of things we can use it.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure how they do it. Like, certainly, it's like, the server issues like the text message, and then, like, it brings you to a separate page, and if you enter that code within like a reasonably tight time frame, then it actually issues the login. Now it, like,
Some of them are apps too.
yeah,
I was gonna mention.
sometimes they authenticate based on IP addresses, I think, and having you read, or like, I don't know, like MAC address? I'm not sure how they do it actually. Yes?
Actually, yeah, I have example of support set, like for Steve, they will be showing, oh, is this you, and they kind of give you a range within like the city. They won't give you a specific IP address, but you kind of see Hamilton in the background of like my avatar with like some address they like somewhere, so I assume they're basing that one, or Steam at least bases their like IP.
Yeah,
But I don't know, otherwise it probably just depends on
yeah.
like other third-party stuff.
Yeah, they have ways of like determining unique device, device numbers and that sort of thing. Yes?
Isn't it usually done with like a token that's like attributed to your account?
Yeah, well, the other thing that you might have is like a long-term cookie, right, with an authentication code.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like the authentication code is not itself the login,
Yeah.
right? You would require, like these people who require the two-factor authentication, like they would also require you to log in, provide the login credentials for every session, right? So, yeah. But for our purposes in this class, I'll just leave it at 3. Interesting question, though. Interesting question. Yeah. You can see we're finally starting to crack the surface of like interesting stuff in this course. Yeah. Okay. So if you create a table with 3 things, did you have a question? Yeah? No? Okay. You're presented with this interface, which allows you to set things up. What is the program that you guys use in SQL again?
Microsoft.
Microsoft Access?
SSMS.
Oh, SQL Server something. I imagine they probably present you something that looks a little bit like this, right?
Not really.
No? Not really?
I mean, depends on the.
Nothing like that.
Okay. All right. Well, each one of these rows is one of your schema items, right? This is where you're specifying your schema for the table we're creating. So, ID number, username, and password, right? Username will be an int. Everybody kind of in the last class was like, what the heck are you doing? When I just selected text instead of
I
varchar.
was just gonna say.
Yeah. Does anybody know what the advantage of varchar is over something like text?
Oh, they probably told us. Yeah, like with varchar, you can choose which like how big you want the variable to be.
It's
That's
comparing to
that's
Java.
regular char.
Oh, there's regular char.
Varchar, I think, was specifically
Yeah.
sized like file size.
But I've never seen text or just char and bar.
I know you can do that with text.
Wait.
So I have a confession to make.
There's no text.
In large part, my SQL knowledge derives from courses that I taught at McMaster University. They have a slightly different way of doing things at McMaster. They have no problem with using text. So, yes?
Google says varchar is best suited for sorting short to medium length strings, while text is better suited for sorting large amounts of textual data.
Okay, so it sounds like varchar for a password is what you want, because like a password is like no more than, yeah, no more than 60 characters, right?
Same with username. Your
Incorrect.
username wouldn't be that long.
Oh yeah.
You say that, and give the last one.
Okay, fine, you converted me. Alright, so obviously our ID should be a primary key. So index, I don't know why it's called index, but this one here is where you set your constraints. So our primary key is ID, obviously. This guy right here, size 64. Why not? Go. This guy right here is auto increment. So I don't know if your database software you've been using has an auto increment on the primary ID. All that it does.
It's identity.
Okay.
Or is that, right?
All that means is that when you add a new entry to the database, you only have to specify these two, and a new unused primary key will be assigned automatically. You don't have to set it yourself, which is useful because how the heck do you know what the next one should be? You don't. That's what that's for. Are there any other constraints that we should reasonably be setting on this database? Password length? Well, let's not worry about that too much. There is an important one though. Yes?
Null,
What about null?
deciding which ones can be null.
Yeah, probably neither should be null, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that means can't be null, I hope. It just says null. But
I think it's the other way around, sir. I think you're not supposed to check it.
not supposed to check it? Well, see, I didn't check it in the last time, and we definitely had, well, see, the problem with text fields is that, like, the difference between null and an empty string still exists. So, like, the database will be sent empty strings, right? Which it'll still read in. So, like, the null field doesn't necessarily, it doesn't pack sufficient punch to prevent blank passwords in this case. But, you know, there's another one that I'm thinking of that's important,
Blank?
right? No. Think about having multiple people with their usernames and passwords in one database. What should we have? Okay, right. Gotcha. Yes?
Would it be wanting unique usernames?
Precisely so. Two users should not have the same username. Well, see, primary key. So yeah, we could, in theory, we could make username a primary key. But here's my rationale, right? It depends on how protected you want the username to be, right? If you have these ID numbers, those can be passed around inside of the SQL database, you know, like, it also reduces packet size, right? If you have to think of this in the context of like table cross-referencing, right? Let's say like we're not just concerned with logging a user in, they want to, I don't know, maybe it's like a photo storage thing, right? They upload their photos and other people. Let's imagine we're making Instagram, right? There's going to be secondary tables that contain data that we want to be able to call out, right? If we make username the primary key on this table, we have to make it the primary key on all of the tables, right? So, except, well, pardon me, it's not the primary key on all of the other tables, but it has to be on all of the other tables to be able to cross-reference this thing, right? So, if, on the other hand, we use an ID number, an anonymous ID number, as the primary key here, we can use that ID number to cross-reference other tables, which means we're doing less passing of this type of information around, which, you know, it's kind of like a secondary safety concern, but, you know, don't throw data around when it's not necessary, you know? Yes?
Is it also like index clustering type thing? Like, you know, isn't that why you want to make an ID for index clustering?
Explain index clustering. Are you looking it up?
No, I'm looking because I remember it from I'm looking at the slideshow because I remembered it. Because I remember like the example if you had a row plus the ID, it's pretty much like make switching things up easier and like faster. Or
Yes, absolutely. So, all right, time for me to lay down the truth once again. This is the class. Dr. Moore lays down hard truth facts. Strings are balls ass slow, just at everything. You know, you do not want to be doing comparisons on strings at any point when it can be avoided. It's a huge runtime penalty, right? Integers are nice and light and fast and clean and quick, but with a string, you have to go through every single element of those two strings, comparing them all down the line to see if they're the same, right? These things generally are organized into B trees, which is a pretty big data structure that you're unlikely to get to, I think, in your data structures and algorithms class, but it's essentially a bit like a binary tree, but with like many, many, many leaf nodes per root node. Yeah, comparing integers is like very, very fast compared to strings. So if efficiency is your concern, integers. Thank you for that. There are also like, you know, there are little things that like ordering. Like, what does ordering on integers mean? This is obvious, right? What does ordering on strings mean? This is slightly less obvious, right? You could do lexicographic dictionary ordering, right? You could use the ordinal values of characters, right? There are different approaches, but integers are always unambiguous. Good. So, save. Wait, no. I'm sorry. We want unique usernames. So, unique. Index name. So, when you create this table and give it a unique constraint, it's basically making a secondary sub-integer thing to also compare to things to see that they're unique. So you just have to give it a name like UID, give it a size like 64. Boom, there we go. Now we save. Oh, I forgot what 64 and 64. There we go. Correct prefix. I'm using text. Varchar wants too many options. text column username and specifications. That would be blank. Okay, now it decided to work. Okay, so I didn't specify a number for the primary key, and I did specify one for the username. It was 64. That's the combination of things that made it happy. Fortunately for all of y'all, this should be, in theory, be something you only have to do once per table, as long as you get it right, you know. So, anyway, so we now have our table. Very good. So, to access this data, right, you have to keep in mind that although the MySQL server is operating on what you think of as the server, it thinks of itself as being its own server. So you have to log into it the same way you would log into an Apache server, right? So, on XAMPP, the default username and password are as follows. Please write this down. So on XAMPP, the default username is root, R-O-O-T, and the default password is empty string. That is, you leave the password blank. Obviously, this will have to be substituted for your real login credentials on CS Unix when you port your assignment code to the server for evaluation. Always, always, always test your code on CS Unix to make sure it works.
I've never had a problem with any code suppliers, especially not sort.
So, I'll just say like one or two more things and then we can get out of here. Unlike many of the sort of other times you've used usernames and passwords, these login credentials will not be entered in by you with a little pop-up dialog. These will be encoded into your PHP program, and they will be sent along to the server with your database request. And so when you form a database request in PHP, you send not only the SQL query that you wish to be executed, but you also send the login credentials for the server you are requesting access to. Make sense? Sending a SQL query to a database, in some sense, is like very similar to the level of abstraction of sending any kind of packet anywhere at all, right? Just because in our case, our SQL server and our Apache server are hanging out on the same physical machine, does not mean that that's going to be the case, you know, out in the real world, right? These things are often decoupled, right? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time and attention, folks. We'll see you all next week.
Good, thank you. For looking at my
I love this.
PHP ad.
I'm not very good at it.
Oh, like a standard. I have so many. I always make sure I have at least one
The
thing.
failed JavaScript exception occurred.
It just
That is,
feels
I
like
think that's exactly what happened,
Yeah.
but now I can't get it to look.
I don't get it, but it's like,
It's on XAMPP, right?
really, you're just.
Yeah.
Just